Welcome to Whiskey Cast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie, and this is episode number 1029 for November 5th, 2023. Coming up in a few minutes.
We don't know nothing, but we got a lot more to learn about the place and every season of business and every stage of growth and development, even just as a business and as an organization, changes things too. And, for a bunch of makers that aren't really business guys, the learning curve's been steep and sometimes painful, but it's all for a goal we believe in, you know.
Texas's Balcones Distilling marked its 15th anniversary last weekend with a big party in Waco. I was on hand and sat down with longtime head distiller Jared Himstedt for a conversation and a round of Ask the Distiller, featuring some of your questions for him. That's just ahead, along with the What I'm Tasting This Week department, a special community segment, Behind the Label, and more. The news is next on this week's Whiskey Cast.
How about a really great 12-year-old Scotch whiskey? I have a stellar recommendation coming up for you in just a minute. Spoiler alert, it's Dewar's 12-year-old.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
The average college basketball power forward is 6'9", which, according to my rough calculations, is 16.5 times my height. I'll stick to aimlessly pottering around in back gardens.
Proud sponsor of Whiskey Cast, Redbreast. Pass it on.
Let's get started with the week's news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore. The UK's independent advertising regulatory body is cracking down on ads for whiskey cask investment schemes. Starting in January, cask sales promoters will have to disclose that their investment products could fall in value, along with other material information designed to make sure potential investors aren't misled. The Advertising Standards Authority's new rules don't regulate cask sales investment schemes themselves, just the way they're marketed. A special charity auction this week raised around €35,000 to help victims of last month's flooding in Middleton, Ireland. IrishWhiskeyAuctions.ie coordinated the auction with support from Irish distillers, which donated most of the whiskeys for the auction. It included 3 vintage bottles of Middleton Very Rare, which led the bidding. A 1988 vintage raised €16,000, while a 1989 bottling sold for €13,400, and a 2009 edition went for €4,550. Former Edrington chairman Sir Ian Good has died at the age of 80. He joined the company as an accountant in 1969 and led Edrington's 1999 purchase of Highland Distillers, which turned the company into one of the leaders of the Scotch whisky industry. Good served as chairman of the Scotch Whisky Association from 2000 to 2005 and was knighted for his services to the industry in 2008. William Grant & Sons has named Heineken executive Soren Hage as its new CEO. He'll take on the role January 1st, taking over from Glenn Gordon, who has been serving as interim CEO for the last 3 years following Simon Hunt's departure. Hage has been responsible for all of Heineken's European operations since 2020. Glenn Gordon will remain on the William Grant board as a non-executive director. And MGP Chief Executive Dave Kahlo is retiring at the end of the year. He'll be succeeded by current Chief Operating Officer and President of Branded Spirits David Bratcher. Bratcher joined the company in 2021 following MGP's acquisition of Luxco, where he had been serving as president. In other news, the Thompson brothers, Phil and Simon, have been granted planning approval for their new Thompson Brothers distillery in Dornoch, Scotland. Highlands Council approved the plans for the distillery, along with 2 new bonded warehouses and a visitor's center and shop. The move clears the way for construction to begin. The Scotch Malt Whisky Society has reopened the vaults in Leith following a £500,000 renovation. The project includes a new 30-foot-long bar along with new retail space and a whiskey snug. The bar features a quote from Society founder Pip Hills, who said, quote, "The people who said it couldn't be done were so dull," after he was warned by people that a club based on single cask bottlings would never work. On that note, the Society has earned a Guinness World Record for the largest online whiskey tasting event. 447 people officially took part in the tasting on September 30th as part of the Society's 40th anniversary celebrations. Lost Lantern Whiskey is opening a new tasting room and production facility in Vergennes, Vermont, about 30 miles outside of Burlington. They'll be offering 7 different flights of Lost Lantern whiskeys, while the production facility will handle barrel storage, blending, and bottling. New releases to mention this week. Nevada's Frey Ranch Distillery is releasing a smoked American single malt whiskey this week. The whiskey was created entirely on the Frey Ranch near Fallon using a smoker crafted by Colby Frey. It's available through the Frey Ranch website for $59 a bottle and will be followed by smoked rye and oat whiskeys. I'll have my tasting notes for it later on, and we'll also hear how Colby Frey not only made his own smoker, but his own peat to use in that smoker on behind the label. Kentucky blender Dixon Dedman is out with his latest 2x oak release. Gem of Kentucky is a double-barreled single-barrel bourbon. That means Dixon selected single barrels from his stockpiles of sourced whiskeys, then finished each one in a separate new charred oak barrel for up to a year before bottling. It'll be an annual release with a recommended retail price of $200 a bottle. Gordon and MacPhail's Ben Romack Distillery is releasing the latest edition in its Contrasts series of single malts. The double-matured Bordeaux wine cask finish started out in first fill ex-bourbon barrels, then spent 5 years in Bordeaux wine casks. It carries a retail price of £60 a bottle at the Ben Romack website. And Glendronach Distillery is out with batch number 12 of its Grandeur single malt. The 29-year-old whiskey comes from ex-sherry casks selected by master blender Rachel Berry. It carries a recommended retail price of $830 a bottle. Diageo is releasing the final installment in Talisker's Expedition Oak series. Talisker Glacial Edge is finished in so-called ice-fractured casks, basically heavily charred casks that were left empty outside during the Arctic winter in Gimli, Manitoba. The cold fractured the casks even more, allowing the 45-year-old whiskey to penetrate deeper into the casks. It carries a recommended retail price of $4,500 a bottle and will be available starting this week. Now, Gimli is home to the Crown Royal Distillery, and Canada's top-selling whiskey is out with a new limited-time offering. Crown Royal aged 30 years will be available in 11 different states and at military base exchanges for $499.99 a bottle while supplies last. And finally, congratulations to Maureen Robinson. She's receiving an honorary degree from Strathclyde University for her services to the Scotch whisky industry. She retired last year after more than 4 decades at Diageo as a master blender, and as we reported back in September, has now come out of retirement to serve as master blender for Kentucky Owl Bourbon. You can keep up on the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. You know, whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from WhiskyCast.
Time now to look at the calendar and check on upcoming whiskey events around the world. Tickets are still available for Big Bourbon Night in Lexington, Kentucky this Friday night. Saturday is Glasgow's Whiskey Festival in Glasgow, Scotland. I'll be in Fredericton, New Brunswick the week of November 14th through the 18th for the annual New Brunswick Spirits Festival. The Whiskey Exchange has its annual Whiskey of the Year tasting on November 15th. The International Whiskey Festival is November 17th through the 19th at The Hague in the Netherlands. Whiskey Live Singapore is that same weekend, and Whiskey Fest Las Vegas is on December 2nd. If you're organizing a whiskey event, let us know about it. We'll add it to the calendar at whiskycast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app.
And now, a Thanksgiving message from Robin Redbreast.
What am I thankful for? Being on the smaller end of the bird scale.
Happy Thanksgiving from Redbreast, proud sponsor of WhiskyCast.
WhiskyCast In Depth is brought to you by Mortlock and the Classic Malts lineup. Balcones Distilling was not Texas's first distillery, but it can be argued that Balcones put Texas whiskey on the radar of whiskey lovers worldwide. The distillery in Waco celebrated its 15th anniversary last weekend with a rain-soaked party that did not dampen the spirits. Jared Himstedt has been with Balcones since the beginning days of the old distillery underneath the highway bridge, and I sat down to chat with the head distiller in his old tasting room. So 15 years in, what have you learned?
Oh, man. We've learned a ton about what making whiskey here is like. Of course, there wasn't a whole lot to leap off of. All of it had to be kind of figured out on the fly. It's really funny in those early years to talk to, legendary Hall of Fame level guys in Scotland and in Kentucky, just to have them be like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what it's going to do. I feel like we're getting closer, but every time we even approach something that seems like an answer, just there's more questions that kind of generates. So we don't know nothing, but we got a lot more to learn about the place and every season of business and every stage of growth and development, even just as a business and as an organization, changes things too. And for a bunch of makers that aren't really business guys, the learning curve's been steep and sometimes painful, but it's all for a goal we believe in. That means a lot to us. So,
what questions are you still trying to figure out?
I think anybody who's had a lot of Texas whiskey knows how easy it is to over oak things, but there is an intensity to the climate that can create kind of a density. I think Texas whiskey has kind of a condensed, the amount of flavor you get in a small package doesn't have to be just a wood bomb. But just the nuances of that, what the microflora for doing open fermentation, how to tweak that. Everything from entry proof to barrel size. Can we make 8, 10, 12-year whiskeys that are going to still read as balanced and nuanced, at least for our take on what that means. The early days, the quick turnaround was fun and nice and probably necessary for the survival of a lot of these distilleries, but just kind of figuring out what's the next way to learn from what the climate's telling us about making whiskey here and figuring out how to pull the right levers to achieve something that see what's possible. I don't know.
You switched to trying things in 500 and 700 liter barrels to try to minimize some of that evaporative loss in the angel share, right?
Yeah. And the loss side is really, some of that's just on the business side of things. If it's 6 years, you have 70, 60 bottles left. That's not a particularly good business model because what you need to charge for those bottles is massive. But also on the extraction side, slowing it down, and evaporation does definitely play a role in that. Can we slow it down in a way that it's aging in a more nuanced way? But that's part of the puzzle. That and entry proof are the two main things we're playing with right now, to kind of see if we can't affect things. It seems to be working. Checking things at 2, 3, 4 years old, where they used to be. That was you're getting in the danger zone almost by then for our climate, especially if it's virgin oak. They're reading to us like stuff used to read at like 6 to 9 months. So it does seem to be a more nuanced, kind of slower, slow burn.
Last night at dinner, you mentioned that you guys are starting to refocus on single malts and maybe not as much emphasis on the bourbons and the other whiskeys that you've been creating. Why is that?
I think in the early years we were so curious and none of us had any training anywhere, and so a lot of it was trial and error and just try things out and see what happens. And if you like a really broad range of spirits and you're sitting there with stills behind you, it's really easy to just say, well, we should throw some of that down. I went through a big high rye phase, and then it was like, we have to make some. Then we had this rum phase, started making rum. And the learning curve for that was great because we tried a lot of things and learned a lot. But as far as there was some sprawl. There was a lack of, we needed an editor, to say, focus a little bit. And I think we finally got to a point where we were ready to self-edit, and this energy that's going in all these directions, if we were to put it back towards kind of our main reason for being here, just kind of allows us a little more direct and just less chaotic and less distracted focus going forward. And to be honest too, I think if you overlap what's really important to us and even our skill set and what we're really good at, like that, to find the overlap of those two Venn diagrams, and I think kind of single malt and even some single grain stuff is really where our strengths are as distillers. So yeah, there's some nice synergy there. It's always sad when you let some things go, but there's only so many hours and so much energy. So doing that to focus on other things that feel like more of a priority and feel more personally precious to you seems like the right move at this point. You know.
Tell me about Cataleja, the 15th anniversary single malt. This was an unusual one for you, right?
Yeah, it's a lot more Scotch referential than a lot of what we do. We do have kind of separate lines of production with what's pretty new, but all the Texas barley that's still kind of 5-6 years in development, still trying to figure out, you know, hot climate and dry climate barley production, and we're putting a lot into that for the future. But we always kind of still want to be nodding to kind of where we came from and the whiskeys that kind of inspired us to want to do this in the beginning. So, you know, our classic M1 yeast, Golden Promise, those whiskeys, we're kind of intentionally diverting the domestic barleys into domestic finishing approaches and kind of the old world Scottish barley that we've been using for a long time into old world finishes, and kind of separating those two paths a little bit. So this is kind of our first more extreme version of kind of splitting those things apart a little bit. I've never used a whole lot of seasoned casks. I know the sherry situation globally is kind of weird and a lot of corners get cut, and I'm not here to make I don't have any statement about that, what people are using and what people have to do to keep those volumes up. We don't do a lot of sherry finishing, so we can actually go and find a producer that has 2 that are decommissioning or 3 over here, and it can be enough for us. So I think because of scale, we get to have access to some stuff that wouldn't be anywhere near covering what some of the bigger producers need for a release. So yeah, we acquired 14 to start with. They're all 500, 600, 700 liter. And it was across 4 or 5, I think there's actually 6 different sherry styles in the mix. And we didn't really initially get them to finish with in a traditional sense. We got them, we knew that we would use them a few times before they got kind of neutral, and then we could start putting new make in for that 10, 12 year, just let single malt ride in these really old, pretty neutral casks that are going to be gentle. But what we were getting out of them was so intense. We kept thinking, by second fill, maybe by the third fill, these are going to be good and neutral, and they're still kind of not. So we had to figure out, what are we going to do with these whiskeys that actually ended up being pretty heavily finished. But then we also took the first fill, second, and third and used those as blending stock to kind of dial in the influence of the 4 or 5 different styles that we had. We ended up only using 4 in the blend, but of those, how much weight we wanted each one to have in the final, and also how intense. The first round was much darker, much more tannic and sweeter, but much to our surprise, some of the sulfur and kind of funkier, earthier, mushroomy and cheesy notes were coming out in later fills. It just gave us a lot of material to work with, a lot of casks to play with, to kind of dial in all of those different axes of things we like about sherry finishes. But yeah, they all started, it's all Golden Promise, M1 yeast and British ale yeast. We always do a double pitch, and then they all spent the first 4 or so years of their life in Hughes, Kentucky, before they got finished. And so pretty straightforward, pretty old story of that path to that whiskey is a pretty traditional approach.
Which is unusual for Balcones to take a traditional approach, especially with American single malt becoming the new fad, as it were. What do you think the potential is for American single malt?
I mean, anybody who's been watching it for the last 10 years or so, the amount of it's increased. I think the quality is always going up. If everyone leans into all these different regions in a way that incorporates them, just like we've seen even with global malts, Australia, New Zealand, obviously Taiwan, India. I mean, there's just been an explosion of us getting, if you're a malt fan, getting malt from places that up until 10, 15 years ago, just you didn't get to have whiskeys from those areas and see what those areas do differently. And Texas, I would put Texas in a similar boat, especially with some of the hotter climate global producers. But I think it's, I don't think any of us have any idea. Not that we, just like nobody saw the craft thing coming, none of us saw American single malt kind of becoming something that has the kind of momentum it has. So I don't know what the ceiling is, but the exciting thing for me as a maker and as a drinker is just all these things that are going to come to market that just literally never existed. We're going to see flavor combinations and nuances that those places are going to affect the whiskey in ways that we just haven't seen before. And some are going to be great, some aren't, but just literally new whiskeys are possible that just never were. So I think we're all pretty excited about it. It's nice to see even years where some segments of the industry are kind of stagnant or level or even falling backwards a little bit. That, I don't know how many years in a row we've been seeing double-digit growth in American single malt sales and volumes for, maybe even a decade now. But, who knows? Who knows what the limit is, but we're along for the ride.
We have some listener questions that I want to get to. I'll pull them up here real quickly. Doc Martin from Sulphur Springs, Texas, wants to know who designed the stills and the idea behind the corkscrew line arms.
Yeah, so those are Forsyth made and designed stills. Our old building, the stills that we installed in our original building, we had to put the condensers where we had to put them, and so our line arm had about a 4 or 5 degree incline, and it was quite long compared to the volume. And when we were moving here and knew we were moving to bigger stills, we worked with Forsyth to try and figure out a way to incorporate as similar as we could the physics and the geometric proportions of those original stills. So the incline gradient on the corkscrew matches the original angle, and the length also. And they were joking with us that if we wanted to have them straight like the original ones, we were going to have to buy a building a few blocks away. And they came up with a pretty ingenious idea to curl it and put that same distance in a much smaller space.
Juan Cruz wants to know what you're doing or planning to deal with the Texas weather changes resulting from climate change, and if there are any initiatives to combat climate change. It'd be interesting to learn about that as well.
Initiatives to combat climate change. That's a tall order. If we're going to slow that down, I think it's going to take a lot. It's going to take a whole community, maybe even a global one, to agree that we're going to try and make some strides there. We've always kind of fiddled with the climate and treated it like an ally, not really a problem to be solved or an enemy to our process. And so I think as it changes, actually some of the work we've been doing for the whole time to try and understand it and work with it has helped make us nimble. We know the levers we can pull to kind of adjust for, because we've already had to adjust sometimes here and there for hotter years, and if that just becomes normal, the way we run distillations, the way we run fermentations, and once again going back to barrel size and entry proof, I feel pretty good about our ability to adjust to those changes. And another thing that's been really cool is how much some of that work that just felt very specific to our approach is becoming valuable to other people as they're finding where they live used to be a little more temperate and it's getting a little bit warmer, and we have people kind of trying to bend our ear and go, hey, we need to figure some things out. The barrels aren't maturing like they used to, so hopefully that could be even a resource that what I think Texas distillers have been figuring out for a while, and not just us, but a lot of the Southwest, will be useful information to help some other people in other parts of the country.
R wants to know, being so hot, he wants to know how much you lose percentage-wise to the Angel share each year.
Used to be our first year would be somewhere around 14, 15, and then it would drop to about 8 every year after that. With these larger casks, even the larger virgin casks that we're using, we've dropped it down to, I want to say the last number I saw was about 4 a year, which is pretty great for this environment. But that also includes going in at 105, 110, big 500, 600 liter barrels. But yeah, we've more than dropped it in half, so that's really promising.
And Leon wants to know what impact the acquisition from Diageo was going to have on bottlings in the future of the distillery. We haven't covered that yet.
Yeah.
You guys were acquired by Diageo earlier this year.
Yeah.
What does that mean for the company?
It's nice to be able to answer completely honestly that what they do well and what we do well are very complementary. We've always just wanted to make stuff, and you have to tell stories well, and you have to get in the right places in the right way to get in the front of the people that you want to get your liquid in front of. And telling stories, having access to some of their network distribution and sales stuff is going to be massive. And honestly, something that we didn't really want to. It always felt like something that was distracting us from the main thing we wanted to do, which is continue to just kind of hone our work. And honestly, it's been really encouraging that the more idealistic and aspirational we get with kind of our vision for where we want to go, the more excited they seem to get. So it seems like they knew who we were pretty well. That they understood what we were going to be wanting to do and what we were going to hope for. And so far, that side of it, there's been nothing but encouragement and excitement. So obviously integrating businesses is a lot of just legwork. There's a lot of details of things, tracking stuff. There's a lot of QC tools that are actually in resources becoming available to us, which is really nice. But like I said, in the long term, I've proposed so many things that I thought for sure weren't going to fly, just to see people that I answer to get excited. It seems like the weirder we get, the more excited they get. So it feels really good so far from that end.
How hard was it to integrate your cask management system with theirs? That's still going on, right?
Yeah, we are actually this weekend is the big kind of final test, and we're supposed to be live Monday with the integrated warehouse tracking, which has been really, really tricky. And I'm sure we'll be fixing bugs and addressing bugs for the next few weeks, but took a lot of work. They track things very differently, and obviously we do so much used casks with corn whiskey and single malt that a lot of the systems that work great for if you're doing all virgin, you use them once, like in bourbon world, that just don't really work for the kind of granularity and tracking we do. We also have a ton of different sizes. Each one of those needs its own code, to have 53s and then 59s and now up to 240 liter, 500, 600, 700, some of them different finishes. Some of them are our own barrels that have been used 2 or 3 times that now have malt in them. And to keep track of all that is stuff that obviously a bourbon producer doesn't really have to mess with that often. So, but we're figuring it out, and I think it's helped even point out some things that would have maybe never occurred to them in the system that might actually be beneficial to even some of the other distillers in the portfolio. So
it's taken a lot of the load off the back end too, in terms of HR and compliance and all that, because you can now rely on their folks for a lot of that.
Sure, yeah, and you can't discount the kind of expertise that a company like them have, and things we wouldn't have even I think known to ask for help around. To have someone come in and start kind of clarifying, here's how we kind of do some things, and you're going, oh man, that never even really occurred to us. And even just simple things like some safety things. Like it's nice to know that there were some blind spots. We're just a little startup that got a little bigger than we expected to, faster than we expected to, and to have some people come in and teach you some things about not only compliance, but even just safety and kind of facility stuff that was just not on our radar. So it's good.
Last question. Give me a sense of where Balcones will be 15 years from now.
Man, 15 years from now, I hope we are making a ton of single malt, and we're sending it all over the world. We've always been pretty excited about what we do, and growth for its own sake isn't really that interesting to me, but knowing, every once in a while someone has like a random sample at Paris, Whiskey Live Paris or something random, and we don't even really distribute there, and then you get emails and text messages and stuff from people all over the world that we're not there in any kind of significant way. And to know what you make is really right in line with the kind of things they're looking for in a whiskey. It just feels like a little bit of a bummer. So that's the part that gets me excited. It's like, can we get this net a little bit wider and a little bit deeper and find our people and get our whiskey in the hands of the people that it's in a more existential sense, like who it's really made for, So hopefully I'd love to see that be, that's a task that's probably never done, but to feel pretty good about we're getting close to finding our folks all over the planet. And I also think we have a unique story and a unique approach that once again isn't for everybody, but to feel like we're honoring all the reasons we do it and the ways that we do it by telling the story well is another big goal that we want to feel really good about how we're communicating the whys the whys behind why we do what we do and how we do it. So.
One other question that was asked, whatever happened to Balcones founder Chip Tate? Well, you can listen in the Whiskey Cast archives for the story of how Chip left Balcones. He is still running Tate & Company in an industrial park near the Waco airport, building stills and reportedly distilling brandy, though none of it's ever gone on sale. Full disclosure, I was a guest of Balcones last weekend for the anniversary celebration, but as always, full editorial control over this episode remains with Whiskey Cast. That's Whiskey Cast in Depth, brought to you by Mortlock, whiskey's best-kept secret. Hidden away for decades in some of the world's most famous Scotch whiskies comes a single malt inspired by an original for a fortunate few. Discover the entire Mortlock lineup at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is abbreviated this week. I'm in the middle of judging a whiskey competition and have been focusing my tasting events on that this week. I did find time to taste the new Aberfeldy 25-year-old 125th Anniversary Edition. It's finished in Oloroso sherry casks and bottled at 46% ABV. The nose has touches of figs, dates, caramel candy, butterscotch, and a touch of dried flowers. The taste has notes of Christmas cake, toffee, subtle spices, and butterscotch for a well-rounded and complex palate. The finish is long with lingering spices, dried fruits, and butterscotch. I'm scoring the Aberfeldy 25-year-old 125th Anniversary Edition a 94. I also had the chance to taste the new Frey Ranch smoked American single malt that I mentioned during the news. It's bottled at 55% ABV. The nose has a soft smokiness and malty character, along with touches of honey and vanilla. The taste has a campfire smokiness to it, along with touches of ginger, honey, and vanilla. The finish, long and smoky with a lingering touch of ginger. I'm scoring the Frey Ranch Smoked American Single Malt a 90. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of nearly 3,600 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at whiskycast.com.
Gabriel here. The new Dewar's 12-year-old has been completely remastered to be richer, smoother, and more balanced. It's a total winner. It's double-aged in first fill premium bourbon casks for greater depth and breadth of flavor, with notes of apples, lemon zest, and spicy and floral notes with a long, smooth vanilla finish. The experts agree too. It's winning awards like pros sink putts. In fact, Whiskey Cast's own Mark Gillespie gave it a 94-point rating, which is pretty amazing for a 12-year-old Scotch. It's also earned a 94-point rating from Whiskey Advocate. That makes it their highest-rated 12-year-old Scotch whiskey. It's an excellent testament to the skill, craft, and refinement of the world's most awarded blended Scotch whiskey, Dewar's. Drink responsibly. Copyright 2023 Dewar's Blended Scotch Whiskey, 40% alcohol by volume.
This week's community segment is brought to you by Waterford Whiskey, and we're going to do something a little different this time around. We're going to introduce you to a member of the Whiskey Cast community who's been spending a couple of days with us here in Haddonfield. Juan Cruz. Welcome, Juan.
Nice to see you, Mark.
Tell us how you got into whiskey.
So I was in college, and I met my wife, and she introduced me to bourbon. And then from there, that's what we drank for most of the time. And then in 2014, after a trip to Ireland, I really got into whiskey, and then it just took off from there.
And what are your favorites? What do you have a preference for?
I think from a Scotch side, Glenfarclas is a favorite of mine, and on the Irish side, Dingle. I have a soft spot for Dingle and Rider Steers, mainly. On the bourbon side, Wyoming whiskey I think is the best bourbon I've ever tried. But I know that's my opinion, but that's where it is.
And you say you have a soft spot for Dingle. You've actually been to Dingle and couldn't visit the distillery, right?
I was in Dingle twice. Drove by the distillery both times on my way to Slayhead, and it was closed both times. Plus, I was accompanied by a minor, so it's not that we could do a visitor tour if it was open. So I haven't been there yet, but I hope to be there soon.
Where else would you like to travel to?
I would like to get to Scotland, and then in Ireland. I've been in Ireland many times in the last few years, but I never visited a distillery. I haven't had the chance, but I think now the next time I go, I'll be able to do that. I won't be traveling with a minor anymore, but Scotland, definitely. I haven't been to Scotland, and if I get a chance to visit Islay at some point, that would be a place that I would love to visit.
You were trying to get there before the pandemic, right?
Yes, before the pandemic, I had a whiskey school week booked. The pandemic put a halt to that, and I rescheduled it a few times, but it got to the point that it wasn't feasible, so I'm still waiting to get a chance to visit Islay.
Well, we're not going to taste an Islay whiskey today, but we are going to taste the Ardrey blended Scotch whiskey from Beam Suntory. You have a mini and a Glencairn there, and I have a mini as well. And we will pour these out. And there are no wrong answers with this. And I need to put my glasses on to look at the label. It is bottled at 48% ABV, which is good. A little stronger than most blended scotches. So go ahead and stick your nose in there and tell me what you get.
I think I'm getting a little bit of a citrus, perhaps lemon.
I'm getting that as well.
For the time being, I think that's the main one that I get. I do not get an ethanol burn, so that's good. Mm-hmm. Even though it's at 48%, which some are kind of ethanol forward, this one isn't.
I'm getting a little bit of butterscotch. Some dried flowers as well. Let's try the taste. Go ahead and take taste.
I think I'm getting the kind of caramel butterscotch on the taste. I'll keep trying. You want to give it a try?
I'm getting caramel and butterscotch as well on the taste, along with some subtle spices that come alive leading into the finish. Getting a little bit of brown sugar as well.
Yeah, there's a sweet. Yeah. There's a sweetness there, and it is not harsh going down. It's very smooth. And how would you rate the finish? I think it's like a medium to long, like moderate to long finish on it. I can still feel it after tasting it.
Yeah, I think it's a nice long finish. It warms all the way down into the chest. Nice warm finish with those subtle spices that sort of last into the finish.
Should we put water in it?
Go ahead.
Just a tiny bit. I think this is... Just a little bit.
Just a couple of drops?
Yep. Stir it. Didn't change in the nose much for me. Let's give it a taste. Definitely, I get the sweetness and some of the citrus also on the taste. Either caramel or sugar or butterscotch. I mean, my database is a little bit limited, but that's what I'm getting. Or maybe I put just too little water. What else?
Well, the thing with water is you can always add more, but you can't add less. So,
yeah, I mean, gotta take it easy with that. Because if you put too much, you dilute it too much, and then you reduce the strength too much and may not get all the aromas and the flavors.
I'll put you on the spot and ask you to put a score to this one. What would you score it?
To score it? For me, I think based on how smooth it is and how it warms you up and the sense that I can get, I think this is probably an 89 or a 90 for me. And that's without doing much calculations. I think it's there in that range.
And using the whiskey cask scale, which anything above 93 would be considered an A, and anything from 87 to 92 is a B. I'd give this one a B as well and give it about a 90 as well.
That's what I feel about it. That's what it feels like, about a 90.
Well, thank you for doing this, and thank you for spending the weekend with us, Juan. It's been a pleasure to have you. And let me ask you finally, why you decided to join the Whiskey Cask community and what you got out of it so far.
Well, I got into whiskey, and then I've always been looking at how to learn more about it. I've read many books about whiskey, but I think that the individuals and the personal stories and knowledge bring it another perspective, and it's good to hear about that because you learn things that you normally would necessarily learn from just reading a particular book on a specific subject. So I think that aspect of it and being able to interact with like-minded whiskey lovers, it's to me the best part of the community, and the learning adds a lot of value, especially with the course that was added recently. There's a lot of good information there and things that I didn't know, and I've been able to go through it and learn about them.
Well, thank you for being part of the Whiskey Cask community, Juan, and thank you for joining us.
And I want to thank you and Christina and the entire Whiskey Cask team for inviting me and dealing with me for a weekend. And I can't really thank you enough for the invitation and for letting me be part of the podcast.
Well, it's been a pleasure to have you, and thank you again, Juan. And that does it for our community segment. It's brought to you this week by Waterford Whiskey. Visit them on the web at waterfordwhiskey.com.
That's the sound of our whiskey growing on Dunbell Farm, County Kilkenny. We know where every grain comes from. Only Irish barley, one farm, one terroir at a time. Waterford Whiskey, the most naturally flavoursome single malt.
Let's wrap up the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and people who make whiskey unique. The folks at Nevada's Frey Ranch Distillery are certainly unique in that they not only grow all of the grains they distill on the ranch, but they also build a lot of the equipment they use too, such as their own malting equipment. So when Colby and Ashley Frey decided they wanted to make smoked whiskeys, Colby went to work building a smoker.
We smoked it ourselves by taking a silo, and we put a wood-burning stove underneath it, and we brought a chimney up from the wood-burning stove to the top of the silo, and we had a fan at the bottom where that fan pulled the smoke from the top to the bottom through the grains. And so we created our own kind of homemade peat, out of decomposed plant matter, which is decomposed corn stalks, which is kind of like what peat is, decomposed plant matters over thousands of years. And we accelerated that process a little bit and made it a little bit faster, but it's really kind of neat for us because it's 100% a product that's made right on our farm, and it's kind of our smoked series of all of our whiskeys.
Tell me again how you did the peat.
So we took decomposed corn stalks and we mixed it with this like powder. It's almost like a flour that comes off the mill, and it's like a real fine corn powder. We mixed it with water, which made like a paste. We mixed it with the corn stalks, and we pressed it in bread pans really hard, and then we dehydrated it after that, and it made these like blocks of peat, almost like logs of peat, and so it's kind of our homemade version where we want to do everything on the ranch, and we want to kind of have a unique product that's all of ours. So that's why we grow all of our grains, wheat, rye, barley, and corn on the farm. We also want to make our own peat or have something local, and we don't have natural peat in Nevada. We don't have bogs where they grew thousands of years of decomposed plant matters that grew and died and everything. So we had to improvise a little bit there.
So now you know the recipe for making your own peat. Though to be completely transparent, the phrase did ship in some peat from Scotland to use alongside their homemade peat. If there's something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just get in touch with us. That's all for this edition of Whiskey Cast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, and, of course, a complete archive of past episodes going all the way back to 2005. In fact, next time around, we'll celebrate our 18th anniversary of the very first Whiskey Cast episode. Get in touch with us on X, Threads, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskeyCast, or you can use the WhiskeyCast community app. Download it today from the Apple and Google App Stores. Our email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
A thoughtful gift is hard work. What you need is a go-to multi-purpose gift for all occasions. A bottle of Redbreast can say, "Enjoy every minute, they grow up so fast." Oh. And equally nails, "Apologies for the back pain, I should have just hired a moving company."
Proud sponsor of Whiskey Cast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Find the new Dewar's 12-year-old and discover what all the awards are about. You can toast and thank me later. From Dewar's, the world's most awarded blend of Scotch whiskey.
Whiskey Cast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2023, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.